The Outlanders Journey. Tier 1, Level 2. Chapter 3. Laurel, you're traveling again. According to Ernog, it's safer to navigate through the underground cave network than through the grasslands. This route provides access to relatively clean, moving water, which also serves as a reliable compass as it flows north. The downside, of course, is the bats and all their putrid guano. Your boots squelch and slide, and twice now you've slipped ass first into shit. Even after multiple prestidigitations, the stench remains on your clothes. At least Maya Lee finds it funny. 10 days, you say to yourself like a mantra. 10 days, and you're in the Western INA. 10 days. You manage to heal most of the critically injured this morning, and you feel confident that you evaded Lasha's notice, for now, though surely she will find it suspicious that many of the orc's burns and scars have suddenly vanished. To your disappointment, you discovered that the residual side effects of the spider plague couldn't be healed by your spell. Only Ark has been able to treat it miraculously on Ernog, and come morning, he could no longer perform whatever spell that was again. I think that was Saranre's intervention, he said, but I'll keep practicing. You meet Alog and Urim, the two orcs who've lost the ability to walk due to the plague. They're both in their 30s, and they're the sole survivors of their families. The looks on their faces convey complete destitution. This morning, Urim pleaded to be left behind, as he would only burden the group, but Ernog dismissed his request. He, Matuk, Olfin, and Olur, the 4 strongest individuals, opted to carry Alog and Urim. You volunteer to stay close to them and prestidigitate the ground beneath their feet. At least you can prevent them from slipping. The walk is sluggish, much more than you're used to when it was just you, Bach, and Maya Lee. You push away the thought that the journey will take longer than 10 days. There's no hint of sunlight. If not for Maya Lee, you would have no idea how long you've been going. After every hour, she announces the time to everyone. You still don't understand how she has such an accurate internal clock. No one else seems particularly impressed or interested, but you and Bach give her a little pat on the shoulder each time. Leading the way are the direwolves, who have been trained to navigate this cave system since they were born. You learn from Ernog that the path you're taking is an ancient route, reserved only for the most desperate of situations. It's strange to find yourself a part of their history now. Just behind the wolves are Dura, Mok, the scouts, and the hunters. In the center of the pack are Ark, Errol, and Taida. Following them are the remaining orcs, including the sick, injured, and elderly. You, Maya Lee, and Bach stay in the back with Alog, Urim, and their carriers. Once we reach the river, we can rest and have something to eat, says Ernog, breathing heavily. He and Matuk, holding hands, have formed a chair-like structure with their arms, allowing Alog to sit as comfortably as possible. You can see the clear shame on Alog's face, and his dilapidated posture as he tries to stay balanced. We'll be there soon, you assure him. Amidst the squelching and your labored breathing, you begin to hear the sound of flowing water. A small breeze blows past you. It smells almost fresh. Do you want to take a break? Bach asks Ernog for the 3rd time today. I can carry. Ernog shakes his head once more. When I need the help, I will ask for it. In truth, you don't want Bach carrying anyone. He's grown noticeably more fatigued these past couple of days. Every night, he tosses and turns violently, mumbling protests in his sleep. All you can do is helplessly wrap your arms around him and hum Mama's lullaby in his ear. You wonder if it has to do with the tense encounters with the Everlight people that triggered these nightmares. Bach, you telegraph through the mental link. He flinches before glancing at you. Don't push yourself, all right? Once we get to the water, you should try to take a nap. He shakes his head. I don't want to. I won't force you to, But I think some rest will be good for you, all right? Okay, I'll try. Gradually, the sound of the flowing water grows louder until it's a roaring torrent. A cool mist begins to spray on your face whenever the winds roll through. About an hour later, you hear cheering up ahead. You see Dura waving her arms, shouting back to the group in Orcish. Ernog breathes a heavy sigh, smiling. We've reached the rapids. It's time for a well-deserved rest. You clear a little spot near the edge of the river. Dura comes over to eat with Ernog. You stare down sheer cliffs at the deafening whitewater rapids, churning and crashing over sharp boulders. It's a 60-foot drop at least. An icy mist splashes upon your face. If someone slips and falls here, the impact alone could kill them, and then the hypothermia would finish off the survivors. Up ahead, you watch a scout toss a large bucket tied to a rope into the river. With precision, she fills and pulls it up without spilling a single drop. Then she repeats this task with 5 more buckets. You realize this is how you've managed to drink clean water every day. Someone travels down here regularly. While you rest, you accept a dried ration from Ark. You have volunteered to be a poison and disease tester for the food that the Everlight followers have brought. Since you've already been inoculated, the worst symptoms you might feel from the spider plague are body sores, though, at this point, you're fairly certain it's safe. If the disease has already passed through this group, the only people at risk here are Bach and Maya Lee, though it's possible Senos has already inoculated them as well. The taste of the ration is bland and chalky, but surprisingly filling. You wolf it all down in a few bites. Ernog and Dura watch you intently, waiting to see any effects. I'll probably be fine for at least several hours, you say. I heard it sometimes takes days. Even a small risk makes me nervous now, says Ernog. You nod. I know, but I'm fairly certain we're safe. Bach devours his fried squash and jerky. He yawns and lies down, closing his eyes. You drape a blanket over his shoulders. Maya Lee, too, gobbles down her meal. I'm finished, she announces with a loud burp. She bolts and scuttles away to Mock. Without even considering the dangers here, the two begin to run around with the direwolves, weaving through the other groups. Mock, Lasha shouts. I will not have you hurting the poor girl. Immediately, Mock halts, and Maya Lee crashes into him. Rock is still prancing about happily. Ernog waves his brother over, calling his name. Seeing this, Mock slumps his shoulders and waddles over begrudgingly. Maya Lee drags her feet behind him. Rock and Sean plod along as well, curious about what is happening here. If you have the energy to run around like that, you have the energy to learn magic, says Ernog. Mock groans. I thought you wanted to learn. I healed a lot of people today. I'm tired. Plus, Elder Lasha will be watching us. You pat the ground next to you for Mock to sit. Before you learn more spells, you should understand magic on a fundamental level. You look over at Dura and Ernog. And if you two are interested, I reckon everyone here can learn a bit. Maya Lee plops down next to you and puts your arm around her shoulders. Her clothes are cold and slightly damp, but her body is remarkably warm. Ernog nods. He peers over at Lasha. Let's speak softly then. Sure. With this group, you start from the very beginning. Your most basic lessons on magic began in your first year of secondary school, and this group will need to learn everything at an accelerated pace. Okay, so for everyone here who has cast at least one spell before, you glance at Mock and Maya Lee. Out of your peripheral vision, you notice Bach's eyes are half open. He's listening. When your spell activates, what does it feel like? Everyone stares back at you blankly. You may need to simplify your lessons even more. So, something I've realized very recently is that everyone uses different senses to manipulate magic. I used to think that intellect and study were the best ways to cast spells. This is what the elves of New Everland do. It's all very theory-heavy, which is how they invent new spells so often. "One moment," says Ernog. "If you'll allow me, I'd like to translate to the rest of the group." He speaks quietly in Orcish to Dura, Matuk, Olfin, and Olur, who lean in with interest. Matuk, an older man with graying hair, scratches his beard and narrows his eyes. Olfin and Olur, who appear to be twin brother and sister, keep glancing at each other as if the other person might understand better. You see Alag and Urim are also listening, though they seem more aloof than the others. You've never found yourself in such a position before. This supposed magical expert. You, the cheater who flunked out of university, teaching magic. Your father would laugh at such a ridiculous situation. "I apologize," says Ernog. "Please continue." "Oh, it's no problem. If you need me to slow down, let me know." Dura chimes in before you start again. "How elves study magic? They can see magic?" You say. "It's funny you should mention that, because the first magic users of New Everland." You stop yourself, realizing you'll need to justify how you know so much about New Everlonian history. You clear your throat. "From the time I've spent captured by the High Elves, I've managed to glean some historical information about our, captor. He was a mage at a prestigious school." Ernog begins to translate again. "The first magic users of New Everland were not mages who studied arcana, but clerics who were endowed with spellcasting abilities by the god Corellon. The difference between a mage and a cleric is, like I mentioned earlier, that they use a different sense to cast magic." You point behind you. Ark, the Aarakocra over there, is an example of a cleric. He was talking to me about his connection to Saranre. The more connected he feels to his deity, the stronger his spells become. You look at Dura. So, to answer your question, the first elves to use magic were granted this ability through their god. They couldn't see the magic, but they could feel it. As Ernog translates, you see Olfin's eyes light up. He asks something excitedly. "Olfin is asking if it's like a spiritual connection with Grumsh." You nod. "I don't know much about Grumsh, but I suspect it could be exactly like that, if Grumsh grants cleric abilities." Ernog shakes his head. "Perhaps in ancient times, but not recently." He peers at his brother. "Unless that is where Mock's magic comes from?" Mock shrugs. "I don't know." "Well," you say, "I've only given 2 examples. Mages use their intellect to cast spells, and clerics use their spiritual or religious connection to cast spells. But there are other ways beyond that. Maybe the better question for you, Mock, is what does it feel like when a spell you cast goes off?" Mock peers over at the other orcs. Then he reaches behind him towards Rock, combing his fingers through the thick, matted fur. "Every time I cast a spell, Rock is with me. Sometimes I think I can hear and smell and see through his senses." "Interesting," you say. "This is the first time you've ever heard of this kind of magical source. So, is it like your senses are heightened around you? Like you are more in tune with Rock?" He nods. "A little bit." "There are people like that in the forest," says Maya Lee, shaking your arm. "Remember the Aarakocra who made the good berries?" "Like Mama's berries?" says Bach, now sitting up. Maya Lee nods. "They're druids." "Oh, like Ihi," says Bach. You've never heard of this type of spellcaster before. "Why don't you explain what a druid is?" you say to Maya Lee. "They're people who use their connection to the land and to animals and plants for magic." Mock perks up at this. "Yeah, it's like that." Ernog puts his fingers to his chin. He nods. "I see." He translates to the rest of the orcs, who all turn their gaze to Mock with wonder in their eyes. Something worth noting, you say, is that Mock's magic is truly different from the elves. In a very literal sense, Mock's magic comes from a fundamentally different source. That's why I think it's misguided to say he is like an elf simply for having any magical abilities. Mock's eyes widen, and he glances over at Lasha, and then back at you. His mouth dangles open, but no words come out. Olor speaks up, whispering to Ernog. She is asking where your magic comes from, Baron. I guess you could say what I use is kind of like, you tap your finger to your chin, like imposing your will on magic. I have studied some magic, and to some extent, I can sense it from the land, too, but when I'm truly in my element, I'm commanding it, like I'm making it subservient to my will. Maya Lee nods. You understand what I'm describing? You say to her. Yeah, it's like you have to show that you're stronger than the magic, and then it will listen to you, she says. Except sometimes I don't do it right. Yes, you say. It's like I'm putting an extension of myself into it. It's almost artistic, in a way. I'm a crafter. I'm a creator of magic. You realize you've been gesturing wildly with your hands, curling your fingertips like a mad mage. You probably sound and look insane. No one else seems to understand you, except for Maya Lee, who's practically bouncing in your arms. Mock turns to Bach. Where does your magic come from? Bach straightens his back. From Mama. You can't help but burst into laughter. Maya Lee also starts to giggle. Bach tilts his head at you, bewildered. I have a basic question, says Ernog. You talk a lot about changing and manipulating and sensing magic, but what exactly is magic? Is making a fire magic? You say. Well, it depends on if you use magic to make the fire, I guess. You scoff at yourself. That was a stupid answer. I'll be specific here because it is a specific answer. Magic use refers to the manipulation of the energy of the Blue Forest Mountains, which is located southeast of here. Even more specifically, this energy comes from an ore known as residuum, which is mined from those mountains. It's the reason why the mountains glow blue. It's also how the elves are able to craft so many magical items. You can physically see the energy coming off it at all times, so to answer your question, magic is anything that manipulates the power of a specific ore from those mountains. Maya Lee furrows her brow. No, she says. Magic doesn't come from the mountains. That's completely wrong. I suppose since we're from the forest, we use a different source of residuum. You always assumed that the forest's close proximity to the mountains allowed its inhabitants to tap into its energy. Maya Lee shakes her head. It's the same everywhere. The High Elves don't control magic just because they mine some stupid ore. I apologize. I don't understand, says Ernog. So what is the source? You ask her. It's the weave, says Maya Lee. It was created by the goddess Mistra. Oh yeah, says Bach. Mistra. All of the orcs react to the name Mistra as well, even before Ernog translates. We know of the goddess Mistra, says Ernog. She played a central role in the creation of this land. Mistra and Sylvanus worked together to form the lands, says Maya Lee. Mistra made the mountains, and Sylvanus made the forest. You're dumbfounded. No one has ever taught you this bit of history before. You were always told that everything related to magic had to do with the mountains. Right, you say. So, Mistra invented the weave, which is the same thing as the mountains? No, says Maya Lee. Mistra made the weave, and it's the source of all things magic. The weave is older than the mountains. The mountains are just a manifestation of her powers. But why would the elves think magic comes from the mountains, then? They craft powerful magic items and invent spells using the residuum ores. Because they're stupid, even though they act like they know everything, says Maya Lee. Ernog chuckles. Your sister knows more than you, Baron. She probably doesn't mean to do this, but if you two are mismatched in your magical knowledge, then it could arouse suspicion. You can't tell if this is mythology popular among the forest folk or true historical fact. You admit that she's much more proficient than you as a spellcaster. If she's right, it explains why Senos found her so valuable. She possesses knowledge that not even he knows. No. I know all these things too, you finally answer. It's because of that mage that kept us captive. He likes to mess with our heads, but Maya Lee is more resilient than I am. That's why I need her to keep me in check. It's all right, says Ernog, still amused. Though I believe Mock needs 2 teachers now. You laugh. I can't argue with that. Why is it called the Weave? Asks Mock. Because Mistra wove it together like fabric, says Maya Lee. Oh, says Mock. His eyes twinkle as though he has reached another epiphany. Is the weave only in mountain? Asks Dura. It's everywhere, says Maya Lee. It's like air. It's all around us. After Ernog translates, the orcs all look around. Allure pipes up. She is asking if it is harmful, says Ernog. Maya Lee shakes her head. Do you sense this weave? Asks Ernog. She nods. Sometimes, when I have a hard time with control, I can sense the weave getting distorted. I can feel the energy like a tidal wave. I also use the weave to keep time. Bach perks his head up to this. Me too, he says. When I get very mad, I feel it sometimes. It's very hot. Ernog is scratching his head. What is the difference between one who uses magic and one who does not? Why does Mock cast spells while I do not? I suppose, you say, that it has to do with luck and talent, but I also believe it's not entirely exclusive to those with the gift. With enough study, anyone can perform some magic. So you are saying there is nothing stopping us from learning magic? Ernog asks. If you are willing to learn, I'm sure there is a way, you say. Even the elves, with their prestigious and private academic institutions, ultimately believe that magic is something that can be learned by anyone through intensive study. The whole reason they keep it from certain people is that they're afraid it will fall into the wrong hands. I see, says Ernog, scratching his tusk. You notice some of the orcs in the other groups are standing up and preparing to go. They look over at Ernog, waving for a sign. He puts up a hand signal in response. We should wrap up soon, he says. I told them to give us a little more time. Sure, you say. I'll go over one last thing. So, we now know where magic comes from. A magic user manipulates the weave to produce the desired effects. But a magic user has certain limits, too, depending on their skill and experience. In our captor's school, spells were taught by level, based on increasing difficulty. They were categorized from levels 0 to 5. You glance at Mock. For example, our healing spells would probably be the equivalent of a level 1 spell. Oh, says Mock. What would be a level 2 spell? Bella knows a special spell called Misty Step. It lets her teleport short distances. Generally speaking, a higher level spell is not just harder to cast, but also uses up more of your internal magic stores, if that makes sense. Mock shakes his head, furrowing his brow. When you run out of magic for the day, you can feel it inside you, right? Like you're too mentally worn to cast more spells? He nods. Yeah. But there are also some spells that you can keep casting, right? Like they're second nature to you? He nods again. I have a spell like this too. I can use a cantrip called Prestidigitation to clean things, such as the bat poop on the ground. Ernog and the others saw me doing it all day today. Ernog nods. This is what the elves call a cantrip, or a level 0 spell. It's a kind of spell that you can always cast no matter how tired you are. Maya Lee raises a hand. I have cantrips too. So, says Mock, when my hands turned into claws and I accidentally attacked my brother, that was a cantrip? I didn't even think about it, and it happened. I suppose so, you say. It was so intuitive that it doesn't even register to you as a spell, right? Mock gazes at his hands. Yeah. Cantrips are your most reliable tools, so, in a way, they're the spells you need to be the most careful with. The more skilled you are as a spellcaster, the more powerful your cantrips tend to be too. Okay, says Mock. Ulfin asks Ernog something. He is asking if you will teach them how to be magic users, says Ernog. If you're interested, then I'll teach you what I know, you say to him, smiling. Ulfin beams with enthusiasm. He elbows his sister, who rolls her eyes and shakes her head. The atmosphere has quieted to a congenial contemplation. The orcs seem to have a newfound admiration for everything you've taught them. There is a wonder in their eyes at a possibility they once believed wasn't theirs to have. You hear Bok sigh. I want to control my magic someday. Me too, says Mock. You pat Bok's shoulder. I guess we all have a long way to go. If we discover anything new, we ought to share it with one another. You look to Ernog. We should treat magic like the opposite of how the elves treat it. They keep it secretive and exclusive, but we'll make it for everyone. Ernog smiles at you. Once we reach the forest, we will see. He stands, dusting his backside. He whistles up ahead and shouts a command in Orcish. Soon, the group ahead begins to move again. Ernog and Matuk hoist Alog onto their arms. Ulfin and Olor lift Urim into theirs. Mock decides to stay behind near you and Maya Lee, though his attention is focused on his hands. Every once in a while, he whispers a question to Maya Lee, who diligently answers back. You're no longer tired. You're filled with this unusual exhilaration. Everyone is inspired by this newfound knowledge, and you find it tantalizing as well. All these children and their gifts. You wonder if they have what it takes to live up to the potential that you let slip away from your own life. Perhaps there is hope for you as well.